Dear audience friends, welcome to my channel. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Let's get started.
Let me introduce you to the central characters of this complicated love triangle I find myself entangled in. My name is Paula, and I lead a fairly ordinary life. I work in an office that can be described as mundane, with colleagues who often make me question if I'm in a comedy or a horror movie. However, there's a twist in this monotonous routine: my boyfriend, Miguel. He's the kind of person whose name alone brings a smile to your face. But not in the way you might think. Allow me to explain. Miguel and I are like a pair of comfortable shoes. I know it sounds strange, but it truly makes sense. We've been together for so long that I can't even remember when it all began. Our relationship flows naturally, like breathing. We understand and support each other, and of course, we love each other. But here's where things get complicated. If Miguel is my comfortable shoe, Jorge is like that new pair of shoes you can't help but admire in a store. He happens to be Miguel's best friend, and whenever he's around, something ignites within me. Now, don't misunderstand me. I haven't been scheming or plotting any mischief. It's just that there's something about Jorge's smile and the way his eyes light up when he talks about his passions that stirs something deep within me. He makes me feel alive, awakening emotions I haven't felt in a long time. The story unfolds in our workplace, where the constant noise of keyboards fills the air, and coffee flows like an endless river. Occasionally, Miguel and Jorge visit during lunch breaks, and those moments become the most exciting part of my day. Their presence fills the office with laughter and jokes, momentarily bringing everything to life. However, I can't help but notice that whenever Jorge speaks to me, it feels like the whole world falls into place, making me forget about my problems. It's becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the changes happening within me. My relationship with Miguel is stable and comfortable, but there's an unsettling feeling that accompanies it. The initial spark and magic we once had seemed to have faded over time. I don't blame him for this, it's just a natural evolution. And with evolution comes conflict. So here I am, grappling with my own thoughts and emotions, torn between loyalty and the undeniable connection I feel with Jorge. I find myself stealing glances at Jorge when I think no one is watching, unable to suppress a smile when he shares funny stories from his childhood. This scares me because I'm uncertain if it's merely a passing attraction or something deeper. My friends tell me I'm exaggerating, that these things happen, and it's just a phase. But they can't feel my heart racing every time I'm near Jorge, nor can they witness the intense gazes we exchange when we believe no one else is looking. So here I am, in this chapter of my life where lines blur, and emotions become a tangled mess. I don't know what lies ahead or how to navigate through it all. However, I can't deny what I feel, even if it means facing unimaginable consequences. And that's how it all begins, a whirlwind of emotions and complicated decisions. As I mentioned earlier, my everyday life revolves around an office that could easily win the award for the most boring place on earth. But guess what? The monotony is shattered every time Miguel and his best friend, Jorge, make an appearance. Lately, I've been spending more time with them, and that's when things start to get complicated. It all starts with small, casual moments, Jorge and I sharing laughter over inside jokes that only we understand. Gradually, our conversations become deeper, moving beyond the usual weather discussions. Surprisingly, we discover that we have similar tastes in movies, music, and even books. An instant connection forms between us, and it drives me crazy, especially when our glances meet, and it feels like we can read each other's thoughts. I know it sounds insane, but Miguel remains oblivious to what's happening, and I intend to keep it that way. However, there's an undeniable attraction between Jorge and me that I can't ignore. It puts me in an uncomfortable position. I question my actions and wonder why I feel this way when I already have Miguel, who loves me and whom I love in return. Am I betraying his trust? These questions plague my mind, causing confusion to grow stronger. The heart is an enigma, isn't it? On one hand, I feel loyal to Miguel, The person who has been by my side for so long, sharing laughter, adventures, and even difficult moments. I genuinely love him, there's no doubt about that. But on the other hand, there's something about Jorge that calls to me, something that makes me feel alive in a way I can't explain. It's as if I'm caught in the midst of a storm of emotions, with each piece of my heart moving in opposite directions. Since this strange connection with Jorge began, my head has become a battlefield. On one side, there's Miguel, and on the other, there's Jorge. I constantly struggle to maintain composure, torn between the loyalty I owe Miguel and the desire to explore something new with Jorge. My friends become my refuge amidst this chaos, patiently listening to my doubts and fears. They assure me that it's just a superficial attraction, a passing phase. But deep down, I can't help but wonder if there's something bigger waiting for me. One day, while sitting at my desk, lost in a sea of numbers and graphs, Jorge walked by and winked at me. That simple gesture filled my mind with unanswered questions. What did it mean? Was it a joke, or did it hold a deeper meaning? Uncertainty consumed me, and I found myself analyzing every interaction, every word exchanged between us, searching for clues to decipher the truth. Confusion became a colossal monster that refused to relent. I tried to distract myself, focusing on other things, but Jorge's presence lingered in the back of my mind. It felt as though I was trapped in a web of intertwined threads, unable to unravel my feelings. Despite the chaos and fear, there was an underlying excitement, as if I stood on the threshold of something new and thrilling, an experience I had never encountered before. I didn't know what the next step would be, but I was willing to face whatever came my way. This confusion, as maddening as it was, reminded me that I was alive and that my heart continued to beat strongly. One evening, Miguel had to work late, leaving me alone at home. Loneliness enveloped me as I wandered through the empty rooms. Suddenly, a soft knock on the door startled me. Opening it, I found Jorge standing there, wearing his mischievous smile that always drove me wild. He casually asked how everything was going as he entered my home. In that instant, the atmosphere shifted. Whether it was the way he looked at me or the energy that always seemed to surround him, something changed. The air grew heavier, more tempting. We engaged in our usual conversations, sharing anecdotes and laughing at the silliness that only we understood. But beneath the surface, our gazes began to change. They became more intense, more provocative. It felt as though desire charged the air, and every word we exchanged ignited a spark. At that moment, I knew something was about to change. My heart raced, and I felt a tingling sensation, a sign that everything was about to shift. We openly flirted, playing with the fire of temptation. Each laugh lingered a little longer, and every gaze lasted a second more than necessary. It was a dangerous game, but in that moment, I didn't care. Rational thoughts faded away, leaving only burning desire. I struggled to maintain composure, my words getting stuck in my throat. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to resist. Jorge moved closer, and I could feel his warm breath against my skin. The space between us diminished, and our eyes remained locked. The tension was palpable, and what happened next was a cascade of uncontrollable emotions. Our mouths met in a passionate kiss, a kiss I had yearned for. Rationality vanished, leaving only the urgent desire that consumed us. My hands found their way through his hair, while his arms held me tightly. We lost ourselves in the moment, surrendering to the attraction that had been growing between us. It didn't matter that it was a dangerous path, that I was betraying Miguel. In that moment, it was just Jorge and me. Pleasure and guilt intertwined amidst conflicting emotions, as time seemed to stand still. I knew this was wrong, that I had crossed a line that should have never been crossed. But in that moment, all concerns faded away, leaving only the overwhelming desire that bound us. When we finally pulled apart, our ragged breaths filled the space between us. Jorge looked at me with an intensity that spoke volumes, yet said nothing at all. It was a moment frozen in time, a moment where we both knew we had changed the rules of the game. However, the aftermath of that intense moment with Jorge brought about an abrupt change. It felt as though we had crossed a threshold we should have never approached. Time seemed to slow down as my thoughts became entangled in the memory of his touch against my skin. Reality, however, had a way of crashing down on me. Just as I was trying to process what had happened, the doorbell rang, and I realized Miguel had returned home. Jorge had vanished, as if he had never been there. Panic surged through me as I tried to appear calm, greeting Miguel as if everything was perfectly normal, as if my world hadn't been turned upside down just hours before. Nervousness consumed me from within, but I had to maintain the facade. I couldn't allow Miguel to suspect anything. That night became a constant struggle between conflicting emotions. While I engaged in conversation and shared laughter with Miguel, my mind kept drifting back to that moment with Jorge. Guilt gnawed at me for betraying Miguel, but I also felt alive in a way I had never experienced before. After that night, everything changed. Conversations with Jorge became more intense, filled with innuendos and provocations. Every encounter was charged with tension, and every glance carried a secret message. Keeping this secret became an exhausting task. Whenever I was with Miguel, it felt as though I was pretending, hiding my guilt and nervousness. I tried to focus on our relationship, but Jorge's presence continued to haunt me. The same question echoed in my mind: should I continue this forbidden relationship or put an end to it before things worsen? I sought advice from my friends, hoping for clarity, but the decision remained elusive. With each passing day, I felt myself sinking deeper into an emotional abyss. I didn't want to hurt Miguel, but I couldn't deny the connection I felt with Jorge. I became a hostage to my own emotions, trapped between loyalty and desire. Life grew increasingly complicated, and my conversations with Jorge became riskier, more intense. We met in secret, sharing moments that should never have been shared. But every time we parted ways, guilt overwhelmed me. I knew what we were doing was wrong, that we were playing with fire. Every shared moment, every glance, every touch left an indelible mark on my mind. I couldn't escape the magnetic attraction between us, even though thoughts of Miguel flooded me with guilt. One day, I decided to repeat that moment one more time. I sent a message to Jorge, inviting him to my house. Turmoil filled my emotions as I awaited his response. When his reply came, a mix of excitement and nervousness washed over me. I knew I was crossing a dangerous line, but I couldn't resist the attraction I felt for Jorge. Miguel was at work, and I was at home, waiting for Jorge's arrival. Each passing second felt like an eternity, and my mind was consumed by turbulent thoughts. I was aware of the wrongness of my actions, the betrayal of Miguel's trust, but I couldn't stop myself anymore. Finally, the doorbell rang, and I hurried to open it. There stood Jorge, wearing that smile that always made my heart race. We greeted each other as if everything was normal, as if we weren't about to cross a line that should never have been crossed. The tension in the air was palpable, and every glance seemed to carry a secret message. We sat in the living room, engaging in trivial conversations while sharing a drink. But the words were merely a smokescreen, a distraction from the electricity between us. Our gazes grew more intense, more provocative. I knew what was about to happen again, and at the same time I couldn't resist. Our lips met once more, this time with greater urgency and passion. Our hands moved with desire, exploring every inch of each other's skin. We lost ourselves in the moment, surrendering to the attraction that consumed us completely. Doubt and guilt were momentarily forgotten, replaced by overwhelming desire. However, amidst the passion, a jolt of alarm ran through me. Something didn't feel right. And in that moment, my worst nightmare became a reality. The bedroom door swung open, and there stood Miguel, his expression a mix of disbelief and rage. My eyes widened, and a knot formed in my stomach. Jorge also turned towards the door, his expression shifting from surprise to horror in an instant. There were no words to describe the storm of emotions that raced through my mind at that moment. Miguel looked at us with a mix of disbelief and anger, his voice trembling with fury as he shattered the silence with his question, "What's going on here?" I was at a loss for words, not knowing where to begin. It felt as though my world was crumbling around me, and the decisions I had made were catching up to me. Without warning, Miguel lunged at Jorge, unleashing his uncontrolled fury. Blows rained down on Jorge as he tried to protect himself. I screamed, desperately attempting to stop Miguel, but his rage was unstoppable. Jorge, defenseless and naked, was dragged out of the house as the fight continued. Tears mixed with fear and distress streamed down my face. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing, the violence that had erupted before my eyes. Eventually, Miguel pushed Jorge out of the house, denying him the chance to retrieve his clothes. The door slammed shut, leaving me trembling and filled with despair. When Miguel's fury subsided enough for him to return to the room, he turned towards me with a look of contempt. His words cut through me like knives, accusing me of betrayal and insulting me with a ferocity I had never seen in him before. Each word felt like a direct blow to my heart, a painful reminder of how deeply I had hurt the person I loved. The pain of his words overwhelmed me, and all I could do was cry. There were no excuses or explanations that could justify what I had done. I had destroyed our relationship, causing irreparable pain. I felt trapped, consumed by regret and sorrow, as I faced the inevitable consequences.